Okay, good morning, people. How are we doing this morning? I see Lily's here. Good morning, Lily. I see KC's here. Good morning, KC again. Good morning, Mashid. Good morning, Cindy. Jimmy's here. Good morning, Jimmy. Aliana's here. Good morning, Aliana. Ying is here. Good morning, Ying. Good evening, Thika. Good morning, Min. Who else is here? Adalbert's here. Good morning, Adalbert. And Luan's here. Good morning, Luan. Karen's here. Hi again, Karen. Who else? Who else? Who else? So while people are popping in here, today we will just review a few things that we've been talking about Imperial China, not Imperial China, ancient China, in the past day or so. We'll talk a little bit about those technologies we talked about yesterday and try to finish that off. The questions I just asked you to do, we'll deal with. And then I've got, as I said, I've got a little potentially interesting video to show you. We'll see what you think of it. Good morning, Pearly. Yeah, so we got a few things to do today. Let's do them. Okay. So where are we? Well, yesterday I had asked you to read these questions or read this section of the text and ask these questions here, right? And so we read some statements made by our good friend Confucius. Maybe some, I don't know if these are the most important statements that he has ever made, but the textbook seems to think so. So hi Ella and hi Carmen. So a couple of the things that Confucius said in the textbook anyway were that a noble person is concerned with rightness and a small person is concerned with profit. And so we said that in this statement Confucius is saying that your character is much more important than your wealth, right? You should always do the right thing regardless of personal gain, right? So don't be selfish. Don't do things, just looking for money and wealth. Do things because they are the right thing, right? And put the interests of others in front of your own, right? We said that Confucius said here that a noble man does not abandon his humaneness for so much as the space of a meal, right? And so we said that humanity, of human heartedness, of being empathetic and looking after people was kind of a core value of what Confucius was trying to spread, right? And he says that you shouldn't abandon your empathy and your human heartedness and your compassion for people for anything, right? Even if it's just for a little thing, even if it's just for, the space of a meal, even if it's just for an hour. Don't abandon your compassion, don't abandon your empathy, don't abandon your caring and compassion for other people, right? Heaven has given birth to the virtue that is in me. So here he's talking a little bit about, good morning, Caleb. Here he's talking a little bit about some kind of understanding about universal destiny, or the fact that we are all kind of set on a certain path and we have to follow that path. At least I think that's what he was saying with that one. And then the last thing he says here is to govern is to rectify. If you lead the people by being rectified yourself, who will dare not be rectified? It's a lot of rectification there. Basically what he's saying is that if you're going to be in charge of people, if you're going to be the leader, then to be a leader is to be a role model, right? To be a leader is to be someone who acts in a noble, compassionate, human way. And if you do that as the leader, if you do that as the king or the emperor or whoever you are, if you do that, then everybody else will follow your lead. They will follow your example, right? So to govern is to rectify. To govern is to be a role model, to be a good person. And if you lead the people by being a good person, by being noble and virtuous, then who will dare not be rectified? Who will dare not try to live up to your example, right? Oh, and I think I missed one. I'm sorry. I missed the second one. Young men should be filial at home and respectful to their elders when away from home. So Confucius also strongly argued for um, the family relationship, one of honor and loyalty and respect. And he argued that you should take that relationship out into the world. And so as you look up to your parents and your grandparents at home, and as you respect them and honor them at home, so should you honor and respect your elders out in society, right? And this is kind of a clever idea, because if everyone respects people who are older to them, then basically everyone gets respected, because there's always someone older than you around, unless you're the oldest person, and then maybe you don't have to respect anyone. I don't know, but everyone else is respected, right? Yeah, and so some of the ideas that Confucius spreads here are concepts or ideas about what a noble person is, this notion of filial piety, right, of kind of honoring the family and your elders within the family, ideas of humanity, ideas about etiquette, about what things, how you should behave and how you should kind of carry yourself, ideas about heaven, and ideas about governance, and governance being based on virtue, right, on being a role model and being a good person. And so we said that Confucius tried to be a politician. He tried to gain political appointments so that he could advise kings. It turns out he wasn't very successful doing that, but he did manage to gather a bunch of students around him. He taught those students, and those students continued to teach people in the decades following the death of Confucius. And those ideas have come down to us through writing, but also through later dynasties, particularly the Han, taking Confucius's ideas and using them as kind of a blueprint or a code with which to rule their empire. And we said even today there are Confucian schools in China that teach his ideas and his perspectives, which is really quite amazing, right? We talked a little bit. Hi, Sabrina. We talked a little bit about Taoism and the Tao yesterday, and so we said that the Tao is kind of a mysterious force, right? It is beyond perception. You can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, but it is the source of life and the universe. It is the ultimate truth. And so we don't really know what this kind of invisible, intangible force is, but it is in charge and in control of the universe. And like I mentioned, if you're a Star Wars fan, that's very much what the force is in those movies, right? This kind of intangible thing that has a will of its own and it controls the universe, but it cannot be seen or heard, right? And it was a good excuse to put Baby Yoda in there, so there he is. And so as a follower of Taoism, the goal of Taoism was to be in accord with the Tao, right? To align yourself with this mysterious force and to follow the Tao. And so in order to do this, we said that you have to empty your mind out. You need to be calmed and purified until desires are absent and a primordial, natural condition is restored. And when the individual accomplishes that, when they are in alignment or in accord with the Tao, then life becomes spontaneous and natural and effortless. And I don't know if you're thinking about this, but in a way that's a very similar thing to what the Buddha was preaching, right? The Buddha said that if you free yourself from desire, if you calm your mind, if you try to empty yourself of all of those thoughts that are always talking to you, then you will achieve an end to suffering, right? You will achieve enlightenment. And so it's kind of interesting because in a way that's not entirely different from what the Taoists are saying either, right? They're saying that if you empty your mind and free yourself of desire, then you will be acting in accordance with the Tao and your life will be effortless, right? So it's interesting. It's a very similar approach, but with some different words and different concepts around it, right? Very interesting. Very interesting. But we also said in later times, Taoism continued to develop and be elaborated, and so the idea of the Tao was kind of enlarged to include people's spiritual essence, and people tried to do things to prolong their health through practices, through Taoist, practices. They sort of absorbed ideas of two primordial forces, two universal forces, which sounds very similar to the dragon and the phoenix that we talked about earlier, but the Taoists are thinking about it in terms of yin and yang. And so eventually they sort of a Taoist church develops, and it takes on more of an appearance of an organized religion. But again, I think it's probably worth saying or pointing out that it's very interesting how, again, some of these sort of religious and spiritual traditions have something in common, but of course they're different as well, right? And so the Buddha had this idea of meditation and freeing yourself from desire and emptying your mind, but the Buddha's ideas and teachings were also based on the idea of reincarnation and transmigration, which was already a belief that was in existence. And here, the Taoists are kind of doing the same thing. They have a similar idea of freeing the mind from desire and from thoughts in order to live an effortless life. But they absorb something from the pre-existing culture as well, right? The idea of those two forces locked in combat. And so whether you think of it as the dragon and the phoenix, or whether you think of it as the yin and the yang, again, we have some similar ideas, but we also have those ideas being influenced by ideas that already exist either in India or in China. Yeah, super interesting. Right, so today I asked you to read this short section of the textbook talking about the Qin Dynasty. And so the Qin Dynasty will take China from the Warring States period, where we have all these little kingdoms fighting it out, trying to gain control over one another, into a period of imperial China. So a China that is unified under one emperor. So I asked you, how did the Qin Dynasty begin? And so Cindy says here that that's the first thing they talk about. The first emperor, the Qin emperor, he erects a stone tablet on top of a mountain with an inscription, right? And that inscription says something to the effect of, for a long time, people were fighting and warring with each other, but now I have come and we're going to have peace and unity under my rule, right? So Thika says, the first emperor erected a rock on top of a mountain and established the nation, and thus opened the model of struggle. Okay. Definitely the stone was erected there. What other answers do we have for this one, I wonder? There must be more. There's 19 of you. There should be 19 answers. Okay, Pearly. What does Pearly say? Pearly says, first emperor of Qin erected a stone tablet. Okay, proclaiming that the Qin ministers will stop warfare, unify everyone, and give everyone equality. Yeah. So they're kind of confirming themselves as the head of all of these kingdoms, right? Ooh, that was close. Okay, let's go with that. I think that's true, but we can probably say this as well, okay? We can probably say that. Oh, Karen's got something too. Karen, what's Karen got? The first emperor, yeah. That's what I was looking for. The first emperor won wars with the neighboring states and unified them all under one rule. So that's kind of what starts the Qin Dynasty, is this Qin state, these sort of group, group of nobles called the Qin. They are able to eventually defeat all of these other states, and they're able to bring them all under the control of the Qin, right? And so this will unify China under one ruler. So Caleb here says Xinyang built ancient China and built the Great Wall. Yes, that comes a little bit later, Caleb. That's true. It does come a little bit later, but that does happen. That definitely does happen. Now, the textbook also talks a little bit about this idea of legalism. Okay, so legalism comes about earlier, right? Legalism comes about earlier, so it predates the Qin Dynasty, right? So it's already kind of in place. But Cindy says legalism is about devising the best techniques for organizing a state's territory and people so as to maximize a ruler's power and control in both times of war and peace, right? So this is a difficult question, right? This is a tricky question because this is a time in which, and we'll talk about this very shortly, this is a time in which it's very difficult to communicate with large groups of people at the same time, right? There's no radio, there's no television, there's no internet. There is writing. Most people can't read and write. There is a printing press, which we talked about yesterday, but printing stuff actually takes a long time. And so it becomes difficult to communicate with people in, all at the same time like we're able to today. And so how do you keep everybody under control? How do you rule a large territory of people when it's very difficult to communicate with everyone and you don't really have any good technology to do that, right? And so again, you don't have any radio or television or anything like that, and you can write things down, but most people can't read them, and writing things down takes a long time, right? So it's difficult to deal with this, right? But it's true, these legalists were trying to figure out ways to organize the state to ensure that one ruler could be in charge of everything, okay? Yeah, so they centralized power in a central government ruled by an absolute king, maximizing a ruler's power and control in both war and peace by having one authority governed by an absolute monarch. Yes, but I'm going to come back to that one in a second, Karen. Yeah, so this one is important too, because if you remember, the whole reason that the Zhou dynasty kind of fell apart is that power was not centralized, right? It was decentralized. So the Zhou king, the one Zhou king, sent out all of his relatives to rule kingdoms all around him. And the idea was that they would rule as kind of mini kings, but they would listen to him, the main Zhou king. But we said that as time went on, people didn't really want to listen to this one guy anymore. And so they started fighting with each other. And that was because power was decentralized, right? Everyone had kind of an equal amount of power, and they just all agreed to listen to the one Zhou king until they didn't agree anymore, and then they started fighting. And so here the legalists are saying, no, that's no good. If we want to have a stable society, a stable China, then we need everything united, right? We need absolute power in one place, and that one person controls everything, right? So a bunch of measures are introduced by Shenyang, and Shenyang comes before the Qin emperor. So before the Qin dynasty officially starts, Shenyang is making these reforms, and he makes quite a number of them. And I think this is where I think maybe yours comes in, Karen, because there's a law code that comes in that punishes people, but also rewards them for their accomplishments. So maybe I'll put that in there. Cindy says, Qin subjects lived under a regime with a transparent set of expectations, but also a system of rewards and punishments. Yeah. So there is a law code in this empire, which is interesting, right? We talked about Hammurabi's law code from centuries ago in Babylon, right? But here we have another law code created by the Qin emperor, right? The title was used by all later rulers who turned the newly conquered territory into... Oh, right. So that was the creation of the title of emperor, right? So the Qin Dynasty united all of those states under themselves, and then they created this position of emperor. The one guy, sometimes girl, but mostly one guy who was in charge of everything, right? So they created a new title, a new political position, right? One of emperor. What else does Shenyang do? So they create the title of emperor, right? So Shenyang creates this organized, this way of organizing the population, the peasant population. So I said part of the issue with trying to rule people thousands of years ago is that it's difficult to communicate with everyone, right? I don't know if you were paying attention here in Canada, but during the sort of COVID-19 lockdown, we had Justin Trudeau giving a press conference every day, right? And so he would go out in front of his house and he would talk to reporters, and that was live streamed across the country and millions of people watched it. And so here today, it's very easy to communicate with the entire country all at the same time. Thousands of years ago, not so much, right? There's no way to communicate with people. So how are you going to make sure that they are doing what you want them to do when you want them to do it? And so here, the Chinese emperor, well, Shenyang, actually it's Shenyang, creates a way to organize the farming population, right? So he organizes everybody into groups of 5 families, and everyone is responsible to one another. So he kind of makes teams, right? So there's 5 families that are basically on a farming team. They're all responsible to each other. They all make sure that each other works hard, because if they work hard as a team, they will be rewarded, right? If they don't, they will be not rewarded, or they will be punished, right? So all of these families kind of help to ensure that they're doing their job, right? They're made accountable to each other, which is clever. And Pearlie says something very similar. She says he believed the basis for state power lay with an obedient and disciplined farming population. Yeah, and that's also because that's the principal source for revenue. So that's where all your money comes from, right? It's from farming, at least in this period of history. And that's where your army comes from as well, right? So the Qin Dynasty doesn't have an army, right? So nowadays, most countries have professional soldiers, right? We have an army, and all those soldiers do is train to be soldiers. That's their job. But in this period of history, for the most part, we don't have that. The army are the peasants, the farmers. And when it's time to go to war, the farmers put down their farming tools and pick up a sword or a spear. And so having a disciplined farming population means that you also have a disciplined army, because they're the same thing in this period. So so Shenyang feels that if you build these teams of 5 families and that they all are responsible to one another, and they all kind of keep each other in line and keep each other doing their jobs, and then you reward them when that happens, that will mean that you have a good disciplined army when you need one, right? So that's kind of a clever idea as well, right? And then we have the law code, right? So Shenyang's law code was transparent, right? And it applied to everyone equally, right? Regardless of what their status was. And so if you committed a crime, you could expect a punishment, and it didn't matter how rich or poor you actually were. And the laws were very clear, right? So everybody knew what kind of behavior was acceptable and what kind of behavior was not. Okay. Smart guy, this Shenyang. Okay, last question. So they tell us that the Qin Dynasty doesn't last very long, but it is important. It has a number of important legacies that will continue through history. And so, again, this dynasty is significant not because they're in power for a long, long time. They're significant because of what happens during this period. And so, what are the lasting effects? Well, Cindy says, the Qin Dynasty create a stable administrative foundation and a title used by all subsequent rulers. Yeah, so basically the Qin rulers create an empire political system, right? With one emperor in charge of everything with full and sole authority. And they organize the state in a way that other rulers will continue on. And so, yeah, they create kind of a political system or a system of governance here that other rulers will use for hundreds of years later, right? That's important. There's a lot of standardization that happens under the Qin, right? So Cindy says they standardize currency, right? So there's actual money. I'm not sure if money exists in kind of Europe and the Middle East at this point. I think it actually might come later. I think the Chinese invent currency. They invent money a lot earlier as well. Don't quote me on that. The system of writing becomes standardized here during the Qin, yeah. And there's regulations for uniform weight and measures. So there's a measurement system that's created, and that'll continue to be used as well. Yeah, that's important. Thika says, the title used by all later rulers, good. So the title of emperor, and they turned the newly conquered territories into part of their centralized bureaucracy. So again, the power is centralized in one place, and I think we've talked about it already, but bureaucracies are the government workers who kind of do the work of government. Okay, so they keep track of everything, they write everything down, they do all the calculations. That's the bureaucracy, right? So again, the Qin Dynasty creates this political and government system and this new position of emperor that other dynasties will use a little bit later on. They'll use it as kind of a blueprint. Okay, that's cool. I wanted to go back to very quickly. Oops, hang on. I wanted to go back to this very quickly. Not that. This I wanted to go back to. These 20 ancient Chinese inventions. And so yesterday we were talking about which inventions do you think were the most important? And so some of us said paper and printing. I remember some of us said gunpowder. I think a compass was mentioned too. I thought it was kind of interesting that many people chose the earthquake detector as the most important thing. I think it's definitely the most surprising thing. You wouldn't think that people 2,000 years ago would be able to invent an earthquake detector, but of course, as we read here, Zhang Heng, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but Zhang Heng invents this amazing thing, which is quite remarkable and kind of unexpected, right? But again, I'd like to ask you, do you think it was very important to people thousands of years ago? Because again, what I want to point out to you is that this is a time in history where it's very difficult to communicate with other people. So even if you were sitting in the Qin Dynasty China 2,000 years ago or so, and you had your little earthquake detector on your desk, and it started to tell you that there was an earthquake, that's great, but it's very difficult to tell large numbers of people really, really quickly, right? So it might be interesting, and you might be able to tell people in your immediate vicinity, but there's not really a way to tell the entire village very easily. I guess you could blow a horn or something. But I rather think that for people living thousands of years ago, there might have been some other things that were more important, right? Like the invention of bronze and all of the tools and weapons that you can make from bronze, right? Those are an important thing. What about the seed drill here that makes farming easier and increases agricultural output? That's critically important as well, right? Because people need to eat. An innovation like row crop farming, super important, right? So sometimes, there are things that are definitely remarkable, and the earthquake detector is a surprising invention for 2,000 years ago. It's very intriguing that was invented, but I think, maybe some of the more boring inventions like iron smelting probably would have been more important to the people as a whole in terms of the tools that they could use, the weapons they could use, and then of course innovations to farming as well probably would have been important. And the silk thing too probably would have been important because it was a money maker for China. But what about what about today? What do you think? What do you think the most important of these Chinese inventions? What do you think is the most important for us today? Any thoughts? Any thoughts on what might have been the most important innovation today? Okay. So paper making for money, sure. We're probably moving into a point in history where we won't use much real money anymore, that the money will be electronic. But certainly up to this point, paper money has been critically important for trade and for commerce, right? So that's been very important. What else do you think? Yeah, Karen says paper making. So that's a good one too, right? How have we been able to spread knowledge and encourage learning for hundreds of years, right? The internet is new, podcasts are new, video is new, but paper is not. And so for hundreds of years, recently, Karen, but for hundreds of years, people have been spreading knowledge and information and learning on paper, right? That's how we've recorded our knowledge and passed it from generation to generation, is on paper. And so, yeah, the invention of paper has been critically important to the transmission of knowledge. Paper making and iron smelting. That's important as well, right? Even today, um, bronze is used for some things today, um, but iron is still an important metal, right? All kinds of things, cars, buildings, ships, all kinds of things are used or are manufactured from iron, right? So that's still a technology that we use today to build many of the most important machines that we use, right? Yes, arguably yes, but the Chinese didn't invent it, Karen. So, but yes, I think you're right. Maybe. Um, oops, not what I meant to do. Okay, let's leave that for now. Oops. Let's leave that for now. And go back here. So what we'll do is we'll take a little break, stretch your legs, get a drink, whatever you need to do. Come back, and then I have some video to show you. Okay, and the video has to do with what's kind of happening in China during this early Qin Dynasty period, and I think it's going to give us a really interesting little window into the world of ancient China. Sometimes when we're studying this stuff, it's very difficult to imagine what life was like, right? And so for those of you who are in my social justice class, it's very easy to understand what is going on, because we're talking about, for the most part, we're talking about things that are in the present day, that are still happening. And so it's very easy to imagine what's happening. But in a course like this, it's difficult to imagine sometimes what life would have been like 2,000 years ago at the beginning of the Qin Dynasty. And so this video will give us a little bit of a window into that world. But take a break first, come back, and then we'll look at this video and see what we can learn and see what we think about life in ancient China, or very early imperial China. So I'll see you in just a little bit, okay? Okay, welcome back, people. So, we're talking about the beginning of the Qin Dynasty, right? A dynasty that, while it doesn't last very long, it certainly is. It certainly becomes an important one for later imperial China, right? Because it sets kind of a foundation for an imperial system of governance that other later Chinese emperors will use for their own purposes, right? So there's a lot of innovation that happens during this time. And of course, historically speaking, it's an end to that warring states period, which was a period of kind of political decentralization and chaos where people were fighting with each other for hundreds of years, trying to gain control of each other's states. And finally, we have a member of the Qin Dynasty who takes over, who defeats all of the states and unifies them under one guy. And so what we're going to do now is look at a video that gives us a little window into the world of this Qin Dynasty, and it's kind of interesting. And so the movie's called The First Emperor of China, the Qin Dynasty, and it's a historical drama. I don't know how dramatic it is. I'll leave you to be the judge of that. But it tells the story of Qin Shi Huang. I'm sure I mispronounced that. I apologize. Who unifies China's vast territory and declares himself emperor in 221 BCE. And so, as we've kind of been reading about here, a number of reforms happen in this period. We see the creation of roads, the creation of the joining together of a northern wall to sort of protect northern China from the people up there. And so this documentary kind of takes us through a little bit of what's happening during that early period of the Qin Dynasty and kind of what the world would have been like. And so as you can see here, the film was shot in IMAX, so you would have seen this on a really, really big screen once upon a time. And also very interesting, it's a co-production between Canada and China. And so Canada's National Film Board, and I'm not sure who the Chinese production company was, but it was kind of a team effort between Canada and China to produce this film. So here's what I want to do. I want us to watch this film, and I think maybe we'll just watch the first 20 minutes of it, okay? We'll watch the first 20 minutes, and what I'd like you to do is this. I would like you to watch the film and look for evidence of kind of the cultural things that we are looking for, okay? So where in the film do you see subsistence practices, right? Do you see people farming, or do you see them herding animals, or do you see them hunting or fishing or whatever? Evidence of governance or authority or law. So where do we see some of these things happening? Okay, and you will see some of those things. What are people's homes like? How do we see people in this film living? What kind of structures do they live in? What kind of interesting evidence of technology do we have? And keep in mind, technology can be anything, right? Anything that humans make or use for a purpose, that's technology, okay? So even a pencil or a pen is technology, okay? I know today we think about technology in terms of, electronic things like phones and computers and, things like that. But technology is really anything that humans create for a purpose. And so even a pen or a pencil can be technology. Do we see evidence of the spiritual or religious beliefs of the time? Do we see any evidence of this in the film? Okay. And last, do we see any other evidence of cultural expression? So music or artwork, anything like that, okay? So there's a few things I just want you to take notes on in terms of what do you what do you see in this movie? Okay, so the movie's about 40 minutes long. I'd like us to just watch the first 20 minutes today. Okay, so if you look in Microsoft Teams, you'll see that I put a post up and it's got the link to the video, and then it's got the list of things that I want you to sort of keep track of and take notes on. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is go to Microsoft Teams, click on the video, watch the first 20 minutes of it, and try to take notes on all of those things that we just talked about. Okay, subsistence, governance and law and authority, what people's homes are like, any evidence of technology, of spiritual beliefs, of cultural expression. Okay, so keep an eye out for those things in the film. Okay, so 20 minutes. Okay, so go watch the first 20 minutes of the film, take notes on as much as you can, and then come back here 11:45, and we'll just have a very quick debrief of these things before we end class. Okay, so I'll see you in 25 minutes. Enjoy this rather interesting and maybe slightly strange film. Take notes on what you see, and then we'll come back here in 25 minutes. Okay, so good luck and enjoy. Okay, and we're back. So, I don't know what you thought of that. It was made quite a while ago, so it's probably about 30 years old. Um, but of course, if you're, trying to make a movie about something that's thousands of years old, maybe it doesn't need to be totally current. Um, but as you can see, it was quite a big production, right? A lot of money was spent. But there's lots of very interesting things happening, and probably things that are as historically accurate as maybe we can make them. Um, so, what did you think? So Karen says here, yeah, there's harsh there's harsh punishments for disobedience, right? And so um, there was a group of people, a prime minister, and some people around him whoops, trying to overthrow the king, right? And the king, Qin, got word of it, figured it out, and so that one person was tied to 5 horses and pulled apart. Gross, right? The prime minister was forced to drink poison, right? So he died too. So yeah, definitely some pretty harsh punishments, right? What else? What else did you see, or what else did you think? What else did you think? So Karen also says, loyalty to the king. No one could go, oh yeah, next to the throne unless he says so. Yeah. So there's ideas about what space belongs to the king and what space belongs to the people, right? And they're not allowed to enter it, right? It's almost like sacred space, right? That normal people can't enter. Yeah, that was very interesting too. Anything else? All right. Well, maybe we'll pick this up. Well, not maybe. We will pick this up tomorrow. And I'm gonna limb. King. King is definitely the most powerful, right? And particularly when he defeats all of the other states, right? And we see him defeat the last state that opposes him. Um, I'm not sure which state it was. I've forgotten now. But we see him go in and defeat the last state, and he sort of makes himself the king of all of them, right? The king makes himself the emperor. So we see that happen. Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. Come back tomorrow. We'll finish dealing with this, and then I think we'll start to wrap up China. I may have a couple more things for you to look at and to see, but we'll wrap up China definitely by the end of this week, and we'll move on to Greece. Okay, so that's it for today. For those of you who are participating, good work. Nice to see, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Okay, so bye.